I feel very lucky to be here tonight to introduce you to two writers whom I admire so much as people and as poets, and whose voices and presence in the world I am glad for every day. So I'll start with Hanif Abdurraqib. How can Black people write about flowers at a time like this? It's a question that Hanif Abdurraqib answers for us, by my count, at least 13 times throughout his second book of poetry, A Fortune for Your Disaster. Abdurraqib poetry demonstrates just how much beauty Black people can make in a world that would deny us the material for joy. How much beauty Black people can bring to a world that's written our story only as ruin. How much singular beauty can be built by a Black man in a language never meant for his tongue. How much beauty can be wrought from a landscape marked by pain and loss. The pain and loss are not transformed here, but they shimmer, nonetheless, alongside that which bears light, and we feel it all, and staggeringly, because this poetry is written in a language that treasures feeling. This poet writes from the heart, but what is the heart, and what is it capable of? Breaking, yes, and beating too fast, and stopping too soon, and love, and violence, and longing, and betrayal. The heart beating at the center of this book denies none of it. This heart contains it all, just as the world it inhabits does. Cops breaking up the block party, candy nicked from the corner stores, caskets, first kisses, a clutch of peonies, a meal of fried chicken consumed in a car under the glow of orange light. These poems are abuzz, warm and trembling with the urgent energy of all that is holy and all that would hope to destroy us, holding us dangling at the edge of disaster. Death stalks us from page to page, and amid a field of endless graves, we keep moving forward, carrying it all with us into each hand slap that vibrates in our palms, into a dance in the last flush of a sunset, toward a hot stove and a wooden porch bent under the weight of kindred. Abdurraqib holds up a mirror to the world and tilts it this way and that, casting an iridescent light that calls me to consider all that we might make and all that we might make possible in a country that never wanted us to live a life this whole and this wholly considered. To stand in the glow of this hot stove, of a fire that might feed us or consume us, feels triumphant and mournful and defiant all at once. Because here we still are, so many of us. And here is Hanif Abdurraqib wrestling with beauty throughout it all. And here he is tonight. It's my distinct honor to welcome to the stage Hanif Abdurraqib.
Hi, everyone. Thanks to Camille for that wonderful intro. It's really great to be here, though I cannot see any of you. This poem is called The Prestige. The poem begins not where the knife enters, but where the blade twists. Some wounds cannot be hushed, no matter the way one writes of blood and what reflection arrives in its pooling. The poem begins with pain as a mirror, inside of which I adjust a tie the way my father taught me before my first funeral, and so the poem begins with old grief again at my neck. On the radio, a singer born in a place where children watch the sky for bombs is trying to sell me on love as something akin to war, and I have no lie to offer as treacherous as this one. I was most like the bullet when I viewed the body as a door, but I'm past that now. No one will bury their kin when desire becomes a fugitive between us. There'll be no folded flag at the doorstep. A person only gets to be called a widow once, and then they are simply lonely. the bluest period. Gratitude not for love itself, but for the way it can end without a house on fire. This is how I plan to leave next, unceremonious as birth in a country overrun by the ungrateful living. The poem begins with a chain of well-meaning liars walking one by one off the earth's edge. That's who died and made me king, who died and made you. I'm gonna read a poem about basketball, but it's also about my mom. For folks who remember the 98 NBA Finals, then this is a poem you'll know well, or a moment you'll know well. It is maybe time to admit that Michael Jordan definitely pushed off. That one time in the 98 NBA Finals, and in praise of one man's hand on the waist of another's, and in praise of the ways we guide our ships to the shore of some brief and gilded mercy, I touch my fingers to the hips of this vast and immovable sadness and push once more. And who is to say, really, how much weight was behind Jordan's palm on that night in Utah? And on that same night, 1 year earlier, the paramedics pulled my drowning mother from the sheets where she slept, and they said it must have felt like a whole hand was pushing down on her lungs. And I spent the summer holding my breath in bed until the small black spots danced on the ceiling, and I am sorry that there is no way to describe this that is not about agony, or that is not about someone being torn from the perch of their comfort. And on the same night, a year before my mother died, Jordan wept on the floor of the United Center locker room after winning another title because it was Father's Day, and his father went to sleep on the side of a road in '93 and woke up a ghost, and there was no moment worth falling to our knees and galloping toward like the one that sings our dead back into the architecture. And so yes, for a moment in 1998, Michael Jordan made what space he could on the path between him and his father's small and breathing grace. And so yes, there is an ocean between us the length of my arm, and I have built nothing for you that can survive it. And from here, I am close enough to be seen, but not close enough to be cherished. And from here, I can see every possible ending before we even touch. I'm going to read a handful of poems that all have the same title. A funny thing, I don't really like the sound of my own voice, I guess, which makes me the same as many people. And this poem got read on, there's like a poetry podcast where Tracy K. Smith reads a poem, and she read one of these poems, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll just read it like that now, from now. But I can't, so you're just stuck with this. How can Black people write about flowers at a time like this? Maybe all the blues requires is a door through which a person can enter and exit. Every god hides their eyes behind a blue hood. The hooded devil waiting at the crossroads doesn't give a fuck about the women who sent a man wailing with a guitar case on his back. It isn't loneliness if enough tongues have your chorus jumping from underneath their hooded ruckus. Maybe all the blues requires is a person who has been touched before and a caravan of hands busy with their own pleasures. If you can't fashion a song out of that, there is no god or devil that could make something of your soul anyway. A father stands over his crying son and hisses, "I'll give you something to cry about," as if he didn't already bring a child into a world that requires neither of them. How can Black people write about flowers at a time like this? Drake said, "Y'all better not come to my funeral with that fake shit." And this is how I knew he'd never slept on a floor, by way of his loneliness and empty pockets. What is neither here nor there is that I cling to the past, because in it I had yet to know pain, and therefore I was held only by that which desired my boyish appetite. We buried Tyler, and the violets I placed on his grave were plastic, and cost $4.99 at the corner store by the punk house where we had cake on his 19th birthday, and there were purple heart-shaped petals iced into the corner of it. And I am saying that I would not know a real violet if I ran my hands across what I imagine is its silk jaw. I would not know, even if you pulled a string of them from your pocket and gently planted the string along my neck and said someone not here thought this would look pretty on you. Friends, the trick to this one is that I laid the plastic on the grave I least wanted to dig. Death itself, that fake shit I stay praying to show up somewhere. How can black people write about flowers at a time like this? Free love till the check comes, and me and mine reach in our fruitless pockets for the wallets we know we left at the crib next to the framed black and whites of our divorced or widowed parents. There were hand-drawn daisies on the De La Soul album cover once, and now I stay on that hippie shit. Arms open the length of a day's eye and no one running toward them but in a state of ghosts, hand-drawn from the depths of memory all my worst enemies keep. Native tongue, and all that means is I know the exact ground to which my moans owe their treacherous birth. I know which branch of a tree will bend under a storm's weight and offer its palms to my begging mouth. The satisfaction in breaking a loosely cooked egg is in the yellow, clawing its way beyond a bondage of white. There is nothing more arrogant than beauty at rest. De La said D-A-I-S-Y meant the inner sound, y'all. And I guess that explains the insomnia. Y'all, the inner sound is a long silence between a door slamming shut and the kiss of a lock which says, you will never again in your life. Now put that on everything. Put that on the book I slid under a table leg to stop my yoke from running. Put that on any room so empty, every name inside is an echo. How can black people write about flowers at a time like this? But if you'll indulge my worst impulses, isn't it funny how the white petals of the oleander do not render the crow flightless upon being swallowed, and yet the human body crumbles under the weight of their softness? By funny, you may think the joke is about the black thing consuming a bouquet of whiteness without falling from the sky in droves. But by funny, I mean I am adorning my fingertips with white petals and running a thumb along the edges of your mouth, agape with a rapturous desire. To hoard desire is one way of becoming a fiend. My homie peddled white to fiends who took the white peddled into themselves, and some did not survive, but some, I imagine, grew brief black wings. Having never felt it, I still wish upon you the feeling of knowing exactly where your next high will be born from. I do not define the distance between sinning and deliverance. I peddled the white bike downtown on a Tuesday. The homie got 15 for hoarding the white he had yet to peddle inside of a suitcase. His mother cried in the courtroom, mad perhaps with the sudden descent of feathers. I'll read one more of those, and then I'll read a few new poems, and maybe one more from this book. This project was, the project of these poems was interesting for me because I don't really know a lot about flowers, and I still don't. But the writing of them had, I don't know how to best talk about these poems even now, I think, even though I've been talking about them for almost like 8 months now. But I think the most fun I had writing poems was when I was writing poems not trying to gain any new knowledge, you know? When I was trying to manipulate what little bit I could find, you know, I was like hoarding small bits of knowledge and then trying to manipulate them into something useful and then discarding them. So I started a series of poems so I didn't know anything about flowers. And because I overheard this statement, how can black people write about flowers at a time like this, at a reading. The black poet was reading after the election, and I was sitting in, like, behind a white person who thought they were whispering, but they were screaming. Which, like, whiteness, there's a joke there about how whiteness always tells on itself, but I think to even strip that joke away, I also think that generally white people are louder than they think they are. I mean that literally, not metaphorically. But it works metaphorically too. But I still don't know a lot about flowers, but I told myself that if I could write one of these poems without naming the flower in the poem, then I could probably detach myself from the project because I'd achieved whatever it is I was after. So this is the last one I wrote. The flower's name isn't in it, but it's also very easy to figure out. You could probably get it, and then you can tell me later if you got it, and we can share a high five. How can black people write about flowers at a time like this? And it turns out lineage is the most vicious stunt of them all. So name me after the first hands to shake the dirt off my arms and lay diamonds on my wrist, or name me after the pistol kept in the nightstand of a free man who wasn't afraid to use it. You get what I'm saying. Name me for the bride I crane my neck toward each time she runs a pitch black gospel choir back into town. Imperial in my stunt, gold all in my mouth, so I talk that shit them folks shook the hills down for. And now they can't keep my seeds out the air or earth, and even the hollow shelves of them can close the throat before it starts to play me for a fool. Look, I'm crowning so wide, I got enough shade to feed 10 summers and 10 porches of women fanning themselves with the Old Testament and leaning in for the good gossip and whispering, don't you know, there are whole fields on fire still. And I take my reparations in the almost fading blonde petals twirling off the black stem, like when Nina sang Pirate Jenny in a song that came about a slave ship. Name me after the last person who held the apocalypse in their palms and rocked it to sleep for long enough to throw one more drink on the tab, or the first person to have an address everywhere, but only one rent check. I'm too fly to haunt anything but my own reflection, so when I'm gone, I'm gone. And the most vicious stunt of all is how this was your language first. I'm gonna read a couple new poems. The thing about reading is that it feels like you're on stage for hours, or at least for me, but it's only really been like 10 minutes. I'm working on this, I've had the same barber, so I moved back to Columbus in 2017, and I've had the same barber since I moved back. And he's gone through all these like weird but interesting political evolutions. And I've gotten to hear about them because we have, the barbershop and the relationship one has with their barber is one of intimacy by nature, I think. But my barber is also, this has nothing to do with this poem, but it has to be said. I'm like splitting time between Columbus and Iowa City this spring, winter, spring. And while I've been in Iowa City since January, I've seen like 2 other black people and I've seen their hairlines. And so I'm just not getting a haircut there. And so I was back visiting Columbus this weekend and I hit up my barber. I was like, I would like to make, let's link up. I'm trying to make an appointment for 8. And he was like, cool, I got you. And I go there at 8 in the morning. And he's like, why are you here? I was like, well, I made an appointment for 8. He's like, thought you meant 8 p.m. And I was like, well, y'all aren't open at 8 p.m. And he's like, yeah, but I thought you would just like come through. And I was like, oh, no? So we have a very interesting relationship that is complicated but very endearing. And I started to think about, I'm working on this series of poems about how all the TV shows are about cops. And what that means for folks who are not that interested in police. By that, I am folks. And so the title of this poem, and my barber was talking about how he was trying to, I'm not gonna attach police abolition to my barber's politics, but he was talking about how he was like, his children are getting older now and they're trying to watch TV. And he was like, well, I just like, while he was cutting my hair, he said, all the TV shows are about cops. So the name of this poem, in the name of all the poems in the series, I'm only gonna read one. The name of this poem is All the TV Shows Are About Cops. Perhaps if your captor knows their way around a hardwood floor, and a pair of kicks so white they ascend upon being kicked into the dark well of a bedside. Perhaps if your captor once stole a toothbrush from the corner store up some block that looked like your block, and perhaps if they massaged the soles of their shoes with it until the white leapt back to life during a rainy season. Maybe if your captor has good hair and the pick within it points somewhere north. If your captor was the architect of a mean mix and the tape rocked out of a boombox bouncing into a house party perched on a shoulder like a patient and merciful sparrow. If your captor keeps a gold rope chain in their top drawer for the nights they are not beholden to the uniform of empire. If your captor loves their mama or your mama, the distance between love and the ability to punish is a matter of perspective, says your captor, who loves the hood and sharpens their teeth along its borders. Maybe if your captor once carved their name into the brick of a building and then came to love the building more than the people in it, consider that your captor is as heartbroken as you have been once. And so, what is a little blood or a cage? If you and your captor wail in the same tongue, they will say, perhaps it won't matter from where the wailing began. This poem takes its title. Is anyone, I can't see anyone, but is anyone here from Ohio? Yeah. Cool. Where are you from? Lima, no doubt. Where's the other person from? Cleveland. Cool. Both of those are great places. Yeah, I mean, Lima's not that great, but I didn't want to be like, Cleveland's great. Yeah, Lima's not ideal, but we're all from, where we're from is a matter of perspective, I suppose. Where we're from is not always where we began. This poem takes its title from the national song, Blood Buzz, Ohio. Its title and its first line. I was carried to Ohio in a swarm of cataclysms and crisis, of catacombs and cats with slick combed back strands of what were once thickly coiled afros, in a swarm of floods and flooded wrists and flocks of old and new homies festooned in some fly shit passed down from a fading ancestor, hunters and hustlers who hang the trophies of their hunger or wear them, depending on the season, in a swarm of loose-lipped prophets and pine trees. In winter, some might slip the tint off the whip, and I'm carried home by the residue of darkness. From the drive-by shooting, a swarm of dust kicks up, and my dog couldn't dodge the smallest explosion, and I have never wanted someone so dead that I would roll a window down and let the good air out. Tell them folk to pay me what they owe me in the slang they couldn't slip their slow mouths around, the type of sweat that isn't romantic unless my people say so, and when my people say so, it's gonna be in a language you can't hear and wouldn't understand if you could. I cannot explain the humidity anymore beyond what I have already said. I open my mouth and in it we swim an endless passage. It isn't biblical if you fear drowning or if you're not handy with tools. The story I've been told is that as a boy, I found the dying bird in the brambles of the backyard and brought it to the kitchen table, trying to pour small drops of water into its gasping beak. You don't get to hear the part about who lives and who dies. Where do you think all the feathers in the poems come from? I don't know if anyone here is a basketball fan, but or like a women's basketball fan, but I am. And tonight, Sabrina Ionescu can make history to be like the first player in NCAA Division I history to score like 2,000 points, get 1,000 rebounds and 1,000 assists. And that game starts at 9, so we're probably going to miss it. We're going to miss at least the first half, but if we work really hard, we can maybe find somewhere that's playing the second half and we can all go. I said to say I'm going to go, and probably you can go somewhere else, because I can't see anyone. And so this could just be like a room full of serial killers. It's like a room full of serial killers and Camille. Like Camille's like the only person I know is in the room. I'll read 2 more poems, and then I'm excited to hear Timothy read. Every year, I teach young writers, high school writers, at the Kenyon Young Writers Workshop, Kenyon College in Ohio. And these are like, teenagers, 17, 16-year-olds, but they're some of the best writers in the world. They come from all over the world. It's a very selective program, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been doing it for the last 4 years. I'm taking a year off this summer because I want to play video games, truthfully. I really do. It's been, sometimes it feels like I've been working for 5 years straight, and occasionally sleeping. So I'm gonna play video games this summer, but when I'm not playing video games, I teach at Kenyon Young Writers, and because of just my teaching ethos is kind of like, I really want to tear down the hierarchy of student and teacher. And so when I walk in the classroom with these teenagers, I tell them like, y'all are as obligated to teach me as I am to teach you. We're all writers once you step in the room, so we got to get to work like that with that in mind. And so any prompt they write, I write with them, at least at first. It's like a 2-week-long program, and there's 3 workshops a week, or 3 workshops a day. And so I definitely write with them the first week, but the second week I'm like, listen, you all are on your own. Everything I said about no hierarchy is out the window. Because I cannot write 3 poems a day for 2 weeks straight. What is wrong with you people? But early in the process, we do these like introductory poetry prompts, you know what I mean? So it's like, write some, one of the main prompt is you write a list of tangible things about yourself and a list of intangible things, and then you pull something off the list of intangible things and make it like tangible or bring it to life in some way. And so I made my list, and one of my co-writers in the classroom was like, you didn't put that you always wear a hat. You're always wearing a cap. I was like, oh, wow, good call, Irene, I don't know. And I love the slang, and I get that like slang is a quickly moving thing, but I love the slang term no cap. I love it as a declaration of confidence, as a declaration of a lack of confidence. I like it as something that you shout out when you are trying to convince someone how much you care for them or don't care for them. And so I really want to fuck with that as an idea. And so this poem is called No Cap. The old head strokes the winding forest of gray cascading to cover the wrinkles sketched into the sides of his face by the uneven desires of time. And he asks me what on earth the kids down the block mean when they rattle the summer puddles with their laughter and slap hands at the end of a good-ass story and yell, no cap. And I admit, I did find a single gray curling a cruel finger out the depths of my beard's otherwise darkness, but I still know the gospel tucked underneath slang, leaping from even the most decorated teeth. And this is meant to say, come closer. This is meant to say I have nothing left to hide, even with the congregation of the most fashionable shade. I would never lie to you, as I lied to my father at 16 with crisp bills lining my pocket, as he searched the house for the grocery money he left on the table the night before. No cap. I would not betray you now, as my father's own hairline betrays him, retreating to the shadows from which it was born, his dome, a nation with no capital, but still glistening with any season. Say no cap and mean you will stand at attention for your own undoing. The percussion of the knees interior, and the bed that grows harder to get out of, and the lover who's no longer beside you in it. The news says everything is receding. The ice caps will eventually be what swallows the living, a long braid of heat. No cap. Dear friends, a moment for deceptions has long passed, so it must be said. I praise the thick hair that once coiled high on the crown of my mother, and I praise the ancestor who tore handfuls of his burly and blooming afro out at my mother's funeral, littering a procession of discarded black wool in front of the open casket and howling his way towards madness. I praise my barber who tilts my head towards the sunlight, coughing its way in the barbershop window. Praise my barber, whispering, you've got a hairline I would kill for, with a blade to the edge of my temple. Praise the cap, cocked backwards and bowing towards the drowning earth, even on days my cut looks too good to conceal. I would not lie to you about this. Praise that I've never loved anyone enough to unravel the blessing of my own hair upon their leaving. I'm gonna read one more poem that's pretty short, and then that's all for me. Bruce Springsteen is really important to me, and this poem takes its title from the opening line in one of my favorite Bruce Springsteen songs. This poem's called Lights Out to Night Trouble in the Heartland. Besides, by the time this ends, you will have forgotten what drew you here in the first place. The Volta is prey standing in the stomach of a hollow cavern with a dying predator in its mouth. The way I showed up to the basketball court on Scottwood with the blood of my grade school tormentor adorning my white kicks, and then went a year without having to make a fist. I hear violence is unbecoming, but in the moment, it is all I have to throw over both of our shoulders. In the teeth of my beloved, I am being dragged, coughing, to the center of a field that sprouts my mother's favorite flower. Each of them comes out of the ground dying. Do you get it now? No matter how beautiful a child illustrates it, the actual heart is an ugly machine, a hideous chorus of chambers. It gets what it deserves. Thank you.
To read Timothy Donnelly's latest book of poetry, The Problem of the Many, is to be atomized into every nook and crevice of human history. Time folds onto itself, and we are everywhere, all of the time, surveying the bric-a-brac of all human existence, from Prometheus to the flamin' hot Cheeto, from the Tower of Babel to a Dairy Queen creation dubbed the Fritos Taco Grande Belt Buster. In the world as Donnelly presents it to us, everything is worthy of notice and assiduous care. Nothing is taken for granted. The snail, the sassafras, the Diet Mountain Dew, the steam floating from a bag of microwave popcorn, re-entering the Earth's water cycle to become the rain, the singular purple of the great popsicle, the best flavor, by the way. Hold on tight, the poet tells us. Tonight, we're diving in, and dive we do, right into the deep end, and dizzyingly so. It's an experience that might be cacophony, but for Donnelly's deft hand, turning overwhelm into symphony. What's apparent immediately reading any of Timothy Donnelly's work is the scope and breadth of his intellect and curiosity. But coupled with that, what endears me to this poetry again and again is a certain quiet tenderness toward everything living, toward humanity in all its folly and delusion and fumbling, toward our ardent performance of our everyday, toward our silly and disastrous insistence that the life of this planet has us at its center, that our perception is reality. And perhaps there is frustration too, as there always is, isn't there, with anything we love. As the humans throughout the all-encompassing gaze of this book demonstrate, we so often fail, and violently, ruinously so. Would that we were better, but we aren't, but might we be? Some days, I know the strongest feeling is grief, Donnelly says in one poem. But I believe it must be love. It has to be. These poems keep their fingers crossed for us. They hope toward hope, and in so doing, they bid us wade into the world a little more deeply, that we might better see where we are, what we are, and how briefly. The mind at work in these words doesn't work like other minds, and what a privilege it is to wade through the world it illuminates for us. And what a privilege for me to be here presenting this mind to you tonight. Please join me in welcoming Timothy Donnelly.
Thank you. Oh, that was, when she said tenderness that way, it just tore a hole through my heart. Thank you very much, Camille, for that. That was amazing, and thank you, Hanif, for that beautiful reading. It's such an honor to be here. I've stood on this stage many times introducing other poets, but this is my first time where I actually get to read my own stuff, and I feel very, it's a special night for me, so thank you for being here. I'm going to read 9 poems. The first I'm going to read is called Stunt, and that's a word I like because the different meanings of the word, one sort of to hamper the normative development of something, but then also the idea of a prank or a performance. And I think of this poem in some ways as being my origin story. Stunt. Early on in the undertaking, I remember backing out of it. This allowed me to continue outwardly while inwardly I had stopped. Not to make too much of it, but everything followed accordingly. The human in my experience will speak until you agree. Agree, or it will lean too close and bring its hands. Protect what refuses by corrupting it into something scarce. I don't want to ruin it, but in reality, there's no choice. I agree about the weather. I agree to the human voice in its red declamation. But when what punishes has penned itself in sleep, I reduce what words it uses into a toxin I can sing. What is real? And though we had fed long and well at the table, the talk always turned to whether to go on, regardless of what it might say about our moral sense, regardless of what it might cost us in the end, or whether the time had come to surrender. Let the sum of our particles back into the flow, hoping they might, in the long view, recombine into something of value or of beauty, but humbler than the human. Not that we'd ever be able to judge, not that we'll ever be able to know what comes of of what we did, or whether it was worth it, like the towering alien humanoid at the start of Ridley Scott's Prometheus, how it paces to the edge of a powerful waterfall somewhere on what appears to be a still primarily mineral Earth, takes one last look at its oblong mothership, surveilling from a mist, removes its monk-like robe, and drinks as if in ceremony from a cup of animate metallic ooze that quickly disintegrates its all-too-pale flesh, unleashing new organic matter into the ecosystem, strands of DNA unzipping haphazardly in the rush to mix it up with Earth's own chemistry and into offspring whose tumble up it will never witness. Not the earliest infinitesimal blips or supper time in old Persepolis, not opaque dawn in Beijing or any single sentient being separated a moment from the chaos, wholly unobserved, in whom life sank down as if to test itself, limitless, dark, spreading, unfathomably deep, and free, as if at play in ether, a meadow of possibility skittering as axons of foam across the surface swell of the North Sea. I felt once I belonged to it in a way I would collapse the instant I began measuring it in words. Waves in blue profusion dissolving into geological undulations and then pulses in yellow sand. Here a snake crosses my path again in Texas, the length of it like a dew-damp privilege wriggled by a cloud-hid hand, conveying deep troughs and amplitudes back to the sun. We do go on. Near movies end, the last known humanoid of the type to seed life on Earth is uprooted from cryogenic sleep on a made-up moon by a crew of corporate human blunderers it then looks down on with informed disgust, killing off in minutes all but one. In America, Baudrillard says the products of our imagination remind us what is real, the way weariness of existence is how we come to feel, buried in all this abundance, we are still alive. Hold on tight, my circumstance. Tonight we're diving in. Tonight we'll find the baseline subatomic style. Let particles of us entangle knowingly with those of a gold encyclopedia in the ruins of Vienna, or an air of Teosinte across an open border, a common source of being. Before I die, let us be, let being be, continuous, continuous. Thank you. This poem is called The Stars Down to Earth, and it's dedicated to Brett Fletcher Lauer, and I'm reading it tonight also for Ricky, who asked me to. The Stars Down to Earth. The sea is pewter gray with green in it like music. The green is lit in places where the waves begin to rise. They rise and thin and curve, sieving sunlight through them. They beat against the rocks until they flatten into froth. The froth is white like wool. The froth is white like thought that catches in the hedge or on the barbed wire fence strung between the pasture and a narrow gravel road. The froth is white like wool that stretches into glistening through the milder rains of March, or in a fog that feeds it constant countless droplets borrowed from the sea. The sea is bluer now, with less green in it than earlier. The sea is architectural, but the froth is more like thought that catches on a thorn and stretches into glistening after mizzle, after fog, conducting sunlight in the morning when lambs are in the dew asleep on deep green clover, when stars fade out of view without a sound but of the earth. The sea is even bluer, closer to the color I would think to paint the sea than something living underneath it, something rumored of and large, shaken into wakefulness as clouds arrive like lambs awakened from damp clover. The hillside is on fire. The smoke is darker than the clouds and darker than froth. It rises on an angle like a thought that knits its aerosols into the clouds almost successfully. The sea darkens its brow. The sea is blurred brocade on the sofa in a basement a face is forced into. The lambs are pinned down by the forelimbs, shackled and hoisted. The froth is voiceless. What is manipulable is manipulated almost endlessly. The sea is at its darkest, having eaten its shadow backwards. It drags the earth it spits out back into itself like pewter music. Time is on the narrow gravel road, and wool is on the barbed wire fence as stars force the wakening into history. The sea is indistinguishable from sky now. The headlights approaching like a thought, beaten against the mizzle, beaten into droplets hoisted hoisted up like stars from the sea. Something living underneath it rises from the basement, glistening through the froth as time feeds itself on the hillside, conducting the music of the sea up to the heavens and of the stars down to earth. Oh, this is a new poem called Weather Heard as Music. Tonight, a great night wind blows hard against the building as if we were at sea, as if we were at war, and I, some royal personage kept far from care, a softness among the battlements, gold-white worm floating with ease through the chemical air, solemn parade, the high-pitched ceiling painted blue, then decked in stars, a shame so many should have to pay for my effects. They never last. I must represent a thing of value. Don't go through with it, don't go through with it. But even now I can feel it is myself who slips away. And there is no great truth I stand for, no great meaning. It is only the wind. And there is no great truth I am serving, only details of the minor things that befall. Cake crumbs on the tabletop, rubble waiting to be poked through a little further before the froth of the wave comes to shuffle it off into the dark, indescribable deep, where I dissolves so unorchestratedly by the time it all unfolds into some new form of life it has long since washed ashore like a family member, hovered over until recognized. I meant to say that I was going to read that poem tonight for my very good friend Mary Jo Bang, who recently told me that she discussed it with her therapist, which, to what end I am not sure, but I thought I would read that one as a way to introduce or to get to the next poem, which Camille quoted in her introduction. It's called All Through the War, and I dedicated this poem to my daughter, Ada Donnelly. And I'm also reading it with the memory of a very dear friend of mine in mind, Lucy Brock-Broido, who graced this stage a number of times in her life, which came to an end about 2 years ago, March 6th. All through the war, I couldn't remember any of it, any more than I could feel the corporate brotherhood at work among my breakfast flakes or in those protein shakes I drank to keep my strength up. I couldn't feel the toxicity the way I thought I should, little silver pinpricks in my liver and then all over my body, steadily proceeding to a brownout in my limbic system, the not knowing when I was, if or where we were at war with, and for what reason now. All the time I stopped eating meat again. I stopped eating sugar. I bought 4 watches, each watch stopped. I bought a pound of raw, rough bulk lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and I couldn't stop my tongue from licking a certain piece of it like a dirty blue wedge of Toblerone to know how it would feel. As for time, I didn't always feel right with it, especially when alone, especially by the sea, where time widens to include more of itself, partly because of the motion and partly because of sound, which is also motion. A decade of drone strikes in the north couldn't stop Pakistani street vendors from salt roasting sweet corn in pans like deep-sided woks. My eyesight grew worrisome. I felt light tingling in my extremities and left cheek. I imagined meant diabetes, but it turned out to be nothing. I turned out to be fine. Last week, an airstrike in Somalia targeting an insurrectionist youth group killed a dozen or so. Yesterday, they seized a village in the center of the country. After my father's surgery, I went to Ireland on my own. I told the lighthouse keeper I was worried something was wrong with me because I couldn't stop looking at the water with all its changing shapes and color. She said, "We are all the same here, love, all the same." Often in quiet, I can still feel the stone's abrasion on my tongue. I pulled a lichen from the Bronze Age megalith with intent to burn it back home. I made Syrian red pepper and walnut dip flavored with cumin and pomegranate molasses. There is nothing more delicious when eating this. How many seeds did Persephone take? I thought I could cry for my friend no further until I opened her armoire to lay to rest her scented shirts in an appliance box. White, off-white, shell pink, true pink, lilac, lavender, blue. As polar seas warm up, the shrinking difference in air pressure between the poles and the equator weakens the jet stream and makes its path wobblier, explaining all this erratic weather we've been up to. The Senate voted against the resolution to stop support of the Saudi intervention in Yemen as Trump took lunch with the Saudi crown prince. I wake with scratches I can't explain. I order herbal supplements at night online and forget what for by the time they get here. Ashwagandha, schizandra. I read objects are more like events with longevity. On average, 130 Yemeni children died each day last year of extreme hunger and disease. A Saudi blockade on seaports stops the ships delivering aid. These are casualties of war. The instant the technician's needle found a vein, the seascape on the wall rattled uncontrollably. She whispered the clinic used to be a funeral home. Trump showed the prince posters of the assorted planes, tanks, ships, and munitions his oily billions might buy him like an infomercial in the Oval Office. What use is an adaptogen when I worry my own daughter should soon prefer the hazards of an underworld to those of this and social media? I dropped a fossilized trilobite in the toilet and it cracked in half. Billions of years of structural integrity finished just like that. Without Persephone, it all froze over. No crops grew. It was almost the end of us, but Zeus, her father, pulled strings to get her back. This service won't reactivate. I have come to love catachresis because what's wrong with it is right. I light my heart with so much emptiness. There's room here in the dark for everything. War-related violence in Libya left 47 civilians dead this May, 38 men, 3 women, 4 boys, and 2 little girls to dust returneth. One version of the myth says Hecate leads Persephone to her mother with torches at the end of winter. Mother with torches at the end of winter. Some days I just sit back and watch things tear each other apart. It is winter on and off now through the end of spring. Emotion is everything and nothing. Same is true for structure. I said to my daughter on the phone, be an honest person. Just be an honest person. Be honest, be honest, be honest. Some days I can't believe what it means to be alive some days. Some days I think about tearing myself apart, but not exactly with pleasure. Some days I know the strongest feeling is grief, but I believe it must be love. It has to be, has to be, has to. Some days I feel each cell in my body has its fingers crossed. Thank you. Thank you. This poem is called The Endless. I think I'm dedicating everything I read, but this is dedicated to Max Ritvo, a former student of mine, friend of mine who passed away in 2016. The Endless. I saw a yellow butterfly flying, in my opinion, the wrong way, flying across the Sound to Connecticut. I saw a cormorant, oily looking, flying close to the sea's surface, precisely as I floated on it, on my back in the attitude of the crucifixion, minerals in my body in conversation with the minerals of the sea. About the sun, how can I possibly add to what's already been said so well by the ancients, and said with an austerity I'll never know? It is an honor to take a back seat to the ancients who knew how. I was a fat white fish dissolving under the sold-out stadium sun like a god, but like a god, I could live through anything. I'm reading now a poem called Diet Mountain Dew, and I'm reading it for Dorothy Lasky, very dear friend. Dorothy is Sean Lasky, if you must know. Diet Mountain Dew. I'll just take a little. I have built my ship of death, and when a wind kicks up, I'll cut it loose to do its thing across an unnamed lake of you, a firefly sent pulsing through the nonstop estivation of the verses of our South, who in its larval phase would feast on bitter worms and snails, who emerges from its mud chamber, our planet's most efficient luminescence, who turns chemical energy into radiant energy, shedding very little heat. So will I sail the compass of you, pleased with my cold light. I have built my ship of death, aglow in sturdy chemicals and powered up at night like American Express. I'm all customer service, only minus the customer. No service to speak of other than death. You will know my logo by its absence and slogan from the past ad for the sugared style of you on TV in my youth. It goes like this: when my thirst is at its worst, and then I let it trail off into the unsayable, or is it just unsaid because my mouth is full of you again? A green like no other green in the dale, and delicate green or green and decent, surpassing the fern and sprout and April's optimistic leaflet, some stop to admire in nature. They take photographs non-cognizant of other vehicles. You are too green for pasture. You are my green oncoming vehicle, usurper of green, assassin to the grasshopper and its plan. I put me in your path, which is the path a planet takes when it means to destroy another. I think you know I'm okay with that. A green like no other green, resplending in production since 1940, when brothers Barney and Allie Hartman cooked it up in Tennessee qua private mixer named after moonshine, its formula then revised by Bill Bridgeforth of the Tri-City Beverage Corp. In 1958, year Linwood Burton, chemically inclined entrepreneur and ship cleaning service owner, sold his formula for a relatively safe maritime solvent to Procter & Gamble of Ohio, who went on to market it under the name of Mr. Clean, whose green approaches yours, then at the last second swerves into a joke. Yellow plays on green to make blue jealous till it blows up in its face, but I can't not love the smell of it. Citrus reimagined by an extraterrestrial lizard, which is to say inhuman in the way you say inhuman to me. A compliment unraveled in the drawl. Hey, you over there, you look so unaccustomed to temporality, I would have sworn you were inhuman. And time for it after time I fall. Further evidence of my humanity. I am at heart no less susceptible to rot than the felt hat on the head of the rifle-toting barefoot hillbilly, your mascot until he disappeared in 1969. Instinct says he must have shot his self in the woods in the mouth one sunrise when a frost was at hand and the apples fell thick, and he was way too awake when he did so not to think there would be another waiting like a can of you in the 12-pack in my refrigerator. I have built my ship of death, and enough already. Every toxic sip of you preparing for the journey to bloviation. I leave to return, and return to depart again the stronger, for a satisfaction being bound to no port has afforded me. I have built my ship of death, so that even when I crawl back down into the hold of it, alive as what unnaturalness, and you can keep me, it's only to emerge from the other end of it intact and perfectly prepared to be your grasshopper. I think I must be reading faster than I had expected, but I think I'm just going to be reading two more poems. One of them is actually from my previous book, The Cloud Corporation. It's the opening poem in that book, and I'm going to read this poem from my wife, Lynn Melnick. It's called The New Intelligence. After knowledge extinguished the last of the beautiful fires our worship had failed to prolong, we walked back home through pedestrian daylight to a residence humbler than the one left behind, a door without mystery, a room without theme. For the hour that we spend complacent at the window overlooking the garden, we observe an arrangement in rust and gray-green, a vagueness at the center, whose slow, persistent movement some sentence might explain if we had time or strength for sentences, to admit that what falls, falls solitarily, lost in the permanent dusk of the particular, that the mind that fear and disenchantment fatten comes to boss the world around it, morbid as the damp-fingered guest who rearranges the cheeses the minute the host turns to fix her a cocktail, a disease of the will, the way false birch branches arch and interlace, from which hands dangle last leaf parchments and a very large array of primitive bird shapes. Their pasted feathers shake in the aftermath of the nothing we will ever be content to leave the way we found it. I love that about you. I love that when I call you on the long, drab days, practicality keeps one of us away from the other, that I am calling a person so beautiful to me that she has seen my awkwardness, but still seen my awkwardness on the actual sidewalk, but still answers anyway. I say that when I fell, you fell beside me, and the concrete refused to apologize. That a sparrow sat for a spell on the windowsill today to communicate the new intelligence. That the goal of objectivity depends upon one's faith in the accuracy of one's perceptions, which is to say, a confidence in the purity of the perceiving instrument. I won't be dying after all, not now, but will go on living dizzily hereafter in reality, half deaf to reality, in the room perfumed by the fire that our inextinguishable will begins. And I'll end with a poem that's it's a hidden track in my book, The Problem of the Many, and it's called The Human. In the interim, I will find a way to feel at home with the animal. Aristotle, in his Politics, says nature made for politics because alone among animals it enjoys the gift of speech. Other animals have a voice to indicate what is pleasant, what painful, and to relay it to each other. But true speech, says Aristotle, takes things further and is intended to make clear what is beneficial, what harmful, what is good or bad, and this among animals is peculiar to the human, who alone enjoys perception of the just, which nature would never provide without cause, he says, but does so that they might live collectively, in communities, and not like those of the goat, which seeks only what gives pleasure and wanders endlessly to avoid pain, but in settlements, vast cities it takes politics to build, an effort extended across centuries like bridges over waterways, their lengths reflected in the flowing underneath them and up glass faces of towers the sun illuminates with such intensity it feels like intention, the will of what is to go on, to take things further, to adapt parts of the body intended for breathing into a means to force air into sounds, sounds into words, words into prayers of thanks to the sun. And when I close my eyes to brace against the late imperial effects of it, I feel a forebear step forward from a cave in thought, its arms extended as if to take part bodily in the beauty of what we call sky, and through some new distortion in the throat, indicates what the many, still situated in dark behind us, come one by one to tremble at the mouth to say. Thank you.